Hey people, how's it going? My name is Scott Hanselman, and you can find me at hanselman.com. My name is spelled, just like that. And you can PayPal me here, or Venmo, or Vips. I heard about Vips today, so now we're getting... All right. Cool. So one of the speakers had a family emergency, and they asked me to fill in with a second talk. So this is my second talk. I'll be doing another one in an hour. So this one here, I wanted to talk about my online presence, my online Hanselman.com, and what I did when I moved it into the cloud. So I've had Hanselman.com running on the internet now for 24 years, very long time, almost a quarter of a century since the internet started. And so I've got my last name, so my email is my first name at my last name. And then I've got the blog, which is at hanselman.com/blog. That's going to become important in a moment. And that's been going on more or less since 2002. So it's 20 years of blogging with a little bit of a break there for COVID. And then, let's go, woo, did you just go woo for COVID? What was it? Woo, COVID. No, man, that's bad. And then I've been doing a podcast called Hansel Minutes. Hansel Minutes. COVID and podcasts, woo. Hansel Minutes is my podcast. It's called Hansel Minutes because I'm a very bad estimator. In the past, people will say, hey, can you code this program for me? And I would say, yeah, I'll do it in about an hour, maybe 30 minutes. And they would say, are those real minutes or Hansel minutes? Because people know that Hansel minutes are much longer. But this podcast has been going on now for 967 episodes. And I'm just going to start scrolling. One of the nice things about this podcast, it's been every Thursday afternoon for the last 19 years. Now, there's a lot of podcasts online that are just two dudes talking about JavaScript. And, one of the things, that we're having an election right now in the United States, and people are very concerned about the different policies, healthcare and economy and transportation. But the real concern is, are we going to just take podcast microphones away from the men? There's too many men out there. They can just buy a podcast microphone anytime they want, start a podcast, and just be yapping, talking about anything that they want. So I try to bring a show out that is different faces, different people in technology. I want to point out that I'm still scrolling while I've been talking, and I'm still only in the 600s. So you have about 500 hours of content to check out. Go back in there, subscribe to the show. I would encourage you. I'm very proud of this show. It's a very good show. It's 30 minutes long, actual minutes, not Hansel minutes. So it's good for the commute, and I would encourage you to check it out. So I've got these three URLs. We've got hanselman.com, hanselman.com/blog, and then we've got Hansel Minutes. And for the longest time, before I went to work at Microsoft, these were running on a piece of hardware when I was a Microsoft MVP, a most valuable professional, right? You get your MVP award if you blog a lot and speak a lot, and sometimes MVPs get free stuff. You get like free software, free copies of this, free MSDN, free Visual Studio. And there was a company 20 years ago that was called OrcsWeb. That was a hosting company. And OrcsWeb said, hey, if you're an MVP, you get a free virtual machine. I'm like, cool, free virtual machine. You get a free Windows Server 2000 VM with IIS, the Internet Information Server on it. And I'm like, hey, free stuff? I love free stuff. Sign me up. I want free stuff. So I started hosting Hanselman.com at this virtual machine. And it was cool. It worked just fine. I would remote desktop, right? Use RDP, remote desktop, directly into production, because that's how you do it. Just right into production. They call it Hanselmaning into production. So we would Hanselman into production, and I would, set it all up. It was right on the open internet. It was a simpler internet. There was no firewall. There was just a Windows machine out in the open. And it worked just fine, and I never got a bill because, hey, I'm an MVP, pat, feeling very fancy about myself. And then I started to get, somewhere around 2017, 2019, the yellow screen of death. Do you remember the yellow screen of death, friends? Let's Google that, yellow screen of death. Not that yellow screen of death. These are very scary looking ones. I'm talking about the one that looks like this. That's the one where, this is a very complicated screen because this screen here tells you so much about the site. It tells you that they failed to configure it. It tells you that they're bad coders, and then it gives you the line of code that says why they're a bad coder. So it was very embarrassing because you're Scott Hanselman and you're asleep, and then you start getting DMs on Twitter, and everyone's like, hey, your website's down. What's going on? And then there's a line of code. They said, well, I don't know what's wrong, but if you look at line 12, oh man, because I'm out there giving presentations on how to write good production websites, and then this happens. So I wake up and I look at the thing, and it says, out of disk space. I'm like, oh man, I'm out of disk space. That's not good. So I call and I say, hey, OrcsWeb, would you give me more disk space? And they said, well, who are you? I said, I'm Scott Hanselman. I've had a free server from you guys for the last 20 years. And they said, we have no record of you. I said, that's problematic. Now here's the funny part. Turns out OrcsWeb, the hosting company, no longer existed. They had been purchased by a French-Canadian company called SureWeb. And so when I called them, it was very French-Canadian. And there I was like, hey, I'm Scott, and I have a problem with my VM. They're like, oh, we have no records of you. I'm so sorry. And I said, well, how do you know it's us? How do you know it's really SureWeb? And so I gave them my IP address or whatever, you know, like the way they do IP addresses in the movie. When you do like an IP address, like, you know, that looks like a real IP. So, you know, I said, can you ping Hanselman.com and see what the IP address is? And they said, yeah, that's us, but we have no idea what's going on. And I said, well, this is a problem. I need you to give me more disk space. They said, we'll call you back and we'll find out. And they said, well, it turns out a couple of things. One, you never had a virtual machine here at the company. You were the only MVP that ever took us up on this thing, so we never got around of making it a real virtual machine. It's a physical computer. Okay? And I said, a physical computer, you say? And they said, yeah, it looks like this. And I said, well, where is it? They said, it's under Anna's desk. So you're telling me for 20 years I've been running a virtual machine at your company and talking about how great your company is, how amazing it is, and if Anna had kicked it, the whole thing would have fallen over. They said, yeah, it's a problem. It is a problem. And I said, well, they said, well, buckle up. There's another problem. Anna doesn't work here anymore. And we don't know where the computer is. So I was like, well, this is a problem. Can you just give me some of the backups? Turns out there's no backups. So this thing had been running on a physical computer under their desk on spinning rust. Do you know what spinning rust are, any of the young people? Now, this is a funny thing this is where the generation gap in computers happens. I grew up in a time where we could hear our computers. Do you understand that? So if I was in a hosting warehouse and I wanted to find my computer, I would just hit refresh really fast in the browser, and you could hear the hard drive. The hard drive would go. So I'm looking for the hard drive in the thing. So has anyone seen the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark? End of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Everyone else has slides, but I just use Google Images. So here's the deal. This is a picture of the hosting location. And this is where my computer is. And this is the Ark of the Covenant, probably right there. So somewhere there is my computer, and it's on spinning rust. Now, spinning rust is what I call old hard drives, because they used to spin, for the young people who don't remember this. They look like that. And if you bump them, if you stop them, you're screwed. Now, my dad is in the audience, and he's not a technical person, so I'm going to put it in terms that you would understand, Dad. Do you remember the old truck that we had, the old Chevy, or it was a big old gray it was just primer-colored gray car. And when you drive it, you don't stop the car, because there's no guarantee that the car will ever start again. So you keep it running. Right, I'm just going to drop something off. Keep the car running. And then you go and you do your errand, and then you jump back in the car and you drive off. These hard drives are similar to that, because it's been running for 20 years. If I shut this thing down, who knows if it's going to come back? Keep the car running. This thing is spinning in a circle, and I've got no backups. So I immediately FTP, file transfer protocol, into production, and I back everything up, because I'm in trouble. There's no backups, there's nothing. So I've got about a month and a half, 2 months to move this thing off of the physical machine and into the cloud. So I have to start making a migration plan. And this migration plan is very common, because when we talk about legacy systems, it turns out I just inherited a legacy system that I thought was okay. Then you have to make a plan. So what could I do? What's my goal here? My goal is to get off a physical machine. So there's a couple ways to do that. You can use a thing called disk to VHD that will take a physical disk and it will turn it into a VHD, a virtual hard drive, and I could download that. So if I did that, if I took this physical machine and I moved it into the cloud, that would solve a problem, right? It would solve the problem that I'm on physical hardware. And the computer wouldn't know that I moved it into the cloud. But that would be a rather naive move. This naive move has a fancy name that the business people have used to fool folks into going into the cloud for years. It's called lift and shift. You've heard that term before. Yeah, you just lift and shift, right? You're just going to pick the computer up, move it into the cloud, and everything will be fine. But it's still a virtual machine. It's still a 20-year-old version of Windows. It's still IIS, and it still has this disk thing. So I'd have to go and expand the VHD, install it on different hardware. I've got the Windows license to deal with. So I decided that simply doing lift and shift would be a simplistic way to do things. So instead, I wanted to get it onto a platform as a service. Now, there's a really great diagram called Pizza as a Service that will show you the different options that I had available to me. And that's a bad image. This is what happens when you don't have slides, is you have to find the highest resolution picture. There we go. Okay, so here's the deal. Traditional on-premises legacy systems, pizza, mean you need to supply the electricity, you supply the gas, you supply the pizza itself, the beer, all those kinds of things. And if I was going to switch over to a virtual machine in the cloud, or infrastructure as a service, they're giving me the oven and the gas, but I still have to provide everything else. This is just a blog. Why am I managing and maintaining the OS, managing and maintaining IIS, firewalls? They're just giving me electricity. I'd like to get as far over here as possible. So I decided that platform as a service would be the place that would provide me with the most flexibility. Software as a service, as we've seen right now in the WordPress community, can be a challenging situation. I could have found a blog hoster, but then I've given up all control, right? It's like going to a restaurant. You just bring conversation. And in this example over here, they'll even give you friends, which I think that's kind of weird, but you could just show up and start chatting people up. So I decided that I was going to move here. This would give me the hosting environment. So platform as a service in Azure is Azure App Service. There's still a virtual machine, there's still an operating system, but they hide it from you. So I thought that would be very convenient, and that's cool. But then I needed to think about the operating system. So right now I'm on Windows Server 2000, and I started finding out that there's literally things you cannot physically do on 20-year-old operating systems, because there's stuff that was invented later. Like, for example, using SSL certificates, right? And doing TLS 1.2 or 1.3 for security. Literally not possible because it was invented 10 years after the operating system came out. So it was another great reason to get off Windows Server 2000 was to get more security. So going to platform as a service, I asked myself, do I want to be on Windows or do I want to be on Linux? Turns out Linux on Azure is 30% less cost because Linux has no license fee. So I could save money switching to Linux, so that's a benefit. I could also maybe switch to containers and use Docker, and doing that would give me a little more flexibility because moving to Azure is one thing, but I want to be flexible enough that if I quit Microsoft, I could go somewhere else or host it on another machine under my desk. But for demos, running Docker is really convenient. I can run the whole thing on a Raspberry Pi or a small device, so that's a benefit. And then I also had to deal with the fact that the whole thing was written in .NET 2. Yeah, let's pour a little out for our homies there. So that's not .NET Core 2, that's like actual .NET 2. There's some people in the room here who weren't born when .NET 2 came out. So this was written in .NET 2 and web forms. See, and now a couple people groaned at the name, the web forms was good. I don't know why y'all hate web forms. Web forms worked. Web forms works well. So this is a lot of work here. But what's the number one thing that I can do to make this cleaner? What's the number one thing that people don't do when they are thinking about migration and moving things into the cloud? They forget, this is my opinion, they forget that URLs are user interface, and that DNS is the number one thing that you can do to make a migration smooth. DNS, domain name server. So what I did is I set up staging.hanselman.com. I set up a CNAME for Hanselman.com, and I started over the next 2 months building a parallel infrastructure that looks exactly the same as www.hanselman.com in a parallel universe. That way I could test this system by just taking any URL and adding staging in front of it. Seems obvious. You would be surprised how few people realize how powerful DNS is. And if you think about the idea that URLs are UI, look at that, a blog from Scott Hanselman. Oh my God, I was smart in 2017. Check out this URL here. Applications should be submitted electronically. Just type this URL here to begin the process. Yeah? Okay, so this blog post, URLs are UI, actually got on Hacker News once, and I was embarrassed by it because the URL that it was at the time was this. And people teased me. They said, no one has the right to write a blog post called URLs are UI and have .aspx at the end. So I thought it was kind of mean. So now I'm adding more and more requirements. I want to move to Linux, I want to move to Docker, I want to use .NET Modern, and I want to do it in a way that changes my URLs so that they aren't embarrassing, but also that I need to maintain 20 years of URLs. URLs are user interface, which means you can't break them. This is where I think me and Microsoft disagree, because Microsoft loves to break URLs. Just let something be a URL for a couple of years, and they just say, no, you don't need that anymore. All my URLs work now, 20 years later, so it's super important. So if I hit this URL, it switches to look like this. Because not only are they user interface, you know how user interfaces change, how the old iPhone interface looked modern at the time and now it doesn't look modern? URLs can go from looking modern and doing not modern. So this is what's called Pascal casing. Pascal casing, which would be like this. And then there's camel casing, where the hump of the camel is the uppercase C. And then there's kebab casing. Kebab, how do you spell kebab? Casing, with the hyphen in the in-between there. So the kids love kebab casing. So I figured, all right, I'll just switch from Pascal to kebab casing at the same time. I'll remove the .aspx. So not only is DNS one of my strongest things that I can use for my benefit, controlling my URLs is another thing. I want all of those to work. If you go to Hansel Minutes and you pick any one of these episodes, and we pick one, looks like our internet here is choking up a little bit. Come on, internet, people are watching. There we go. I'll look at this guy here, and this is episode 960. So if I type in Hansel Minutes /960, so Hansel Minutes /show number, it'll automatically go to that show. That right there, the slug, doesn't matter at all. Doesn't matter at all, because it's the 960 that makes it work. So I want all of this to continue to work as I move things over into the new world. So what's the first thing that I would do? I've got 3 sites. I've got the home page, I've got /blog, and I've got the podcast. So the first thing I did was I sorted them in complexity. The home page is a brochure. It's like 6 pages. Then the podcast is the one with a database, and then /blog is complex. So I'm going to tackle them in order of difficulty. This one here is was a Razor Pages using MVC. So that's easy to upgrade. There's actually a thing called the .NET Upgrade Assistant. .NET Upgrade Assistant. And that Upgrade Assistant is fantastic. It actually works in both Visual Studio and at the command line. And it will go and walk through your project. You can do it graphically inside of Visual Studio, or you can do it like this in the command line, and it'll go through and it'll make recommendations. Because I was using MVC and Razor Pages, updating that to .NET, in this case .NET Core 3, was really easy. And then since then, I've been upgrading it every year or so. And you can go to hanselminutes.com and go all the way to the bottom of the page. I'm very proud of this. I like this. I think this is actually a best practice. You look at the bottom there, I actually put the version of .NET, I put the commit, the actual git commit, because I want this to go to GitHub, and then a link to the build log. Now, if this was a real production website, you wouldn't want to do that because you're giving away security stuff. You're telling the person what version it is on. But if I was running, for example, Stack Overflow, I would just put if is admin, and then if an administrator were logged in, they would see that, and the public would not. But I just think that's a great feature. And the reason is you don't want to be afraid of your systems in production. People don't talk about the emotions that they have associated with production systems. If you haven't touched your website in a couple of years, you probably have forgotten how to deploy it. And you're like, I think I deployed. Did I deploy it from my laptop, or did I do it at GitHub Actions? Does that still work anymore? Like that low-key anxiety exists with all of your production systems. So you want to design them such that, not that they're well-coded or not that they're pretty or whatever, but I literally do it to not be afraid of it. I code and I optimize my production systems to avoid fear. For me, I can go to my page and I can say, all right, I deployed this on the 31st of March. And I can click on that and I can open it up, and it's going to take me directly into, in this case, Azure DevOps. Some of my sites run on DevOps and some run on GitHub Actions. You can see when it went through is May 31st. It took 2 minutes. I can go and look at that job, and I can literally see it here in the tests. And I run tests as part of my build. So you can see over here, before anything gets published, all my unit tests run. So when I needed to start thinking about moving this site over, I did the .NET Upgrade Assistant, and I felt uneasy because it worked without many errors. And I was like, that was too easy. Like, too easy, it's behind me, or too easy, the bad guy is in the closet. That kind of thing. The murderer is going to get me. So when you feel uncomfortable, write tests. And you write tests until you stop feeling afraid of your code. It might be, people say, use code coverage, you want to have 80% code coverage, that's all BS. You write until you're not afraid anymore. And then when you don't have any fear, then you go. And if something goes wrong in production, you write a test to cover that, and then you do it again. So I moved it, in this case, to .NET 3, and then 6, and then 8, and I got it running, that simple site, and I built a system around it where commits to GitHub would automatically run in Azure DevOps. And now I look at that date and I go, honestly, that's a little bit far ago. That's like 6 months ago, maybe 4 or 5 months ago. I would like to just refresh that, just to prove that it still runs, that it can still happen. I would not want to see that date be a year old. Once I got this working, I could go and test staging dot versus www, and then I could start routing traffic between them, basically doing 50-50 routing, sending some of the users to staging and some of the users to the main one, which brings me to one of the things that I think people don't use when they're thinking about DNS, and that is a reverse proxy, whether it be Cloudflare or what I use, which is Azure Front Door. Azure Front Door is super useful, and very few people, in my opinion, use it and use it well. It's super great. So if we go into my Azure, this is my actual Azure here, and I'm going to show you something cool that we just made. I'm going to open up an extension, because if you go into my Azure here, you can see, as an example, my subscription ID, and you can see my email address and other personal stuff, which is probably not awesome. So I'm going to turn on developer mode, and I'm going to go over to GitHub, and let me see if I can show you this, because I haven't planned this talk, as you can tell. So again, lower your expectations. And then let's do this. We wrote a new plugin that was called Azure Cloak. It's GitHub/Microsoft/ do we call it Cloud Cloak? I think we changed the name. There you go. We did this for a hackathon. So I'm going to grab that, and I'm going to run over to the command line here, and we'll stick it on. Oh, there it is. I already got it on the D drive. Okay, my bad. So I'm going to load this into my browser. It's an unpacked extension because we haven't released it yet. So you have to go and just grab it, and then select it, and then check this out. We used a little emoji of a dude hiding in the cloud, so that was pretty cool. And then we'll put him up front, and we'll turn that on. We'll hide everything that looks important, phone numbers, URLs, all that stuff. Okay? Yo. Huh? Isn't that cool? Hee hee hee. Okay, it blurs everything. So that's cool if you're giving a presentation in Trondheim to turn that on before you put that on the big screen. So just a little FYI there for you. Okay, so I got this stuff working on .NET Core, and I moved it over into an Azure App Service Plan. And Azure App Service Plans are interesting because the pricing, in my opinion, is almost too complicated to understand. So I'm going to make it simpler for you. You want to get the cheapest thing that you possibly can, because I'm paying for all of this with my own money. Don't trust any Microsoft person who has unlimited Azure time, because they're going to pick giant VMs and giant app services, and they're going to end up charging you a lot of money. I was running this on a standard S1, which was the cheapest one, and it was $58 a month, which I thought was too expensive, because I want to run as many things as I can for as cheap as possible. Turns out, and you can maybe just wonder why Microsoft does this, I don't know, The legacy standard is $60 US. The premium is $41. So it's literally $20 less. And you get double the RAM, double the hard drive, it's way faster, and it all runs on SSDs. Now, a lot of people think that an app service plan is one app service plan. It's because the names are stupid. An app service is a website, and an app service plan is a VM. That's all it is. So I'm going to shove as many web apps as I possibly can into the app service plan to get my money's worth. So I actually have the main website, the blog, the podcast, and Azure Friday all running on the exact same app service plan for $40. So what's the trick? The trick is to know what the thing in the cloud offers you and then abuse it. Okay? Why this is important. Physical hardware like that machine that was running under Anna's desk is limited. It has the CPU that it came with, the disk that it came with, and if you want to add more memory, you got to plug in more memory. You want to add another hard drive, you got to swap it out. But you can go into that list and pick the options. Do I need speed? Do I need memory? Do I need, CPU? What the cloud offers, and this is my opinion, that no one really talks about is memory. Memory is cheap in the cloud. I'm talking about RAM. So I've architected my apps not to be super fast, but to cache everything. I'm abusing this thing. 80% memory percentage. 81.167. But the CPU never gets above 15%. So I've been blogging for 22 years. Turns out that's not a lot. You can load every single blog post for 2 decades into memory. It's about 400 megs. 900 podcasts, oh my God, what an accomplishment. It's 50 megs. Put it in JSON file, load it into memory. So this thing is wicked fast, like sub 10 milliseconds fast, sometimes 3 milliseconds. Being able to do that was because I recognized that it's not the CPU that's fast in the cloud, it's that they give me a bunch of memory. And you would never, this is important, you would never run physical hardware with 80% memory. Why not? Because if you get popular, it's going to go to 100%, it's going to blow up, you're going to end up saying, I don't have enough room. But if I got popular, if I got on Hacker News, I'll just scale up for the week, and then I'll turn it down when necessary. Or I'll turn on auto scaling and I'll scale out a little bit, and then I'll worry about it later. So noticing that the behavior of a cloud native application, an application that knows it's in the cloud, should be architected differently than one that is on physical hardware is super important. So while I was doing this, I started caching everything, and it's made the application a lot faster. The other thing I wanted to call out was the use of Docker. I'm going to do this real quick. Oh, I want to also point out my cool prompts. Huh? How sexy is that? This is, you guys know about this? I hope people are using this. This is called Oh My Posh. Who's using Oh My Posh? Who just learned about Oh My Posh? Oh, you guys, so good. Watch. This is why Oh My Posh is amazing. So I'm using Windows Terminal, right? This is you all. This is you all in DOS, right? This is how you live. Why would you live like that? Why would you do that to yourself? No. Pink, green, orange, bright colors. This is the current folder. This is the current Git branch. This is that I have one file added, one file modified. This is the fact that I'm on a dev drive, which is another drive. Who knows about dev drives? Oh, I've only got 5 minutes. I'm going to tell you so much stuff. This is how long the last thing took. What do you think that is? That's my blood sugar. I'm a type 1 diabetic and I have an insulin pump and a sensor. So it's just as important as my Git branch. You never know, right? It's very important information. I'm having a low blood sugar. I got to do something about that. So Oh My Posh is a totally modifiable environment, and you can put anything you want there. You can put your branch, you can put your Azure environment, you can put whether you're in production or not. So now it's colorful. Then I have this, which lets me like pick my directories and stuff, which is super sexy. And then watch this. Colorful directories with icons. Look at the little Docker whale. Isn't that so luscious? Isn't that great? Don't you want to have something so, look at this, so pretty. All of this stuff's on my blog, so you can do this too. But this, I know that this is not the original talk. Now we're talking about the terminal, but this is Windows Terminal, right? Right? So remember, this is you, right? This is me, okay? But that's not all, kids, because this whole talk is going completely off the rails. It's okay. Because what you really want is this. Yeah? No, not enough. We can go deeper. We can go deeper. We can do what's going to happen with Hanselman? Oh, yes. Yes. Let's go. Yes. It's the way God intended your terminal to look like. No, that's Windows Terminal plus retro shaders, which are actual HLSL 3D shaders, plus oh my posh, it's so nice. You should try it. It even has mouse support. And then notice also that it has over here, this part here, that's showing that part of the CRT is broken. So it's like burned out right there. And then every once in a while, you'll see, there we go, there goes the line. You need the CRT scan line as well. So if I realize that may not be attractive for a lot of people, but I want to call out that you can turn on and off the bad CRT effect. And then you can also change the tint color. So if you want like amber or different colors and stuff, you can do that as well. So it's pretty awesome. I hope you like it. Okay, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, we're talking about Docker. Okay, I have like 3 minutes left. This whole talk has gone completely off the rails now. Okay. So, Azure Front Door. That's what we were doing over here. AFD, Front Door. So check it out. Go here into Azure Front Door, and we go to Front Door Designer, and we have our, everything is blurred because security. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so here, I can have Hanselman.com and staging terminate at Azure Front Door. And then anything I put behind it gets routed. So then my back-end pools, the main site and the blog, get routed based on rules that I decide. That's super important. Remember at the beginning of the talk, I talked about how /blog was its own thing. In IIS, which is, 20 years old now, when you have /application name, that physically mapped to an actual IIS application. But in the virtual world, it doesn't need to be that way. You can decide. So here, /blog is actually being routed to this back-end pool of the blog, which in fact is blog, Hanselman blog, right here. Oops, Hanselman blog, beep, boop, bop, boop, boo, doo. This is not working. Let's find it another way. There we go, app service. This blog is actually here. But that URL sucks, right? So I'm having Hanselman.com /blog be auto-mapped to this, which I then hide. So if you hit this URL right here, you're not going to get anything, right? So the system knows that everything is at Hanselman.com /blog. So I slowly started moving these things over to Linux, to Azure Front Door, and then none of you noticed it. Right? If you've ever followed me or followed my blog, these sites slowly moved over and no one saw it. And if they did, they'd see a hiccup and then they would switch over to the blog that was healthy. Being able to use DNS, reverse proxies, things like Azure Front Door, and do it slowly a little bit at a time was super, super useful and super valuable. And then I don't have enough time because this is usually a 90-minute talk, but I put everything running into Docker as well. And then, this is all local, by the way. I can go and test these things locally inside of Docker. And in this case here, I'm actually using Docker on this laptop here to run not only unit tests entirely locally, but also Playwright. And Playwright is actually starting a headless browser, clicking around on the screen, and testing all of the sites to make sure that they work for me. That actually runs headless, meaning you can't see the browser, inside of GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps. So if I change a user interface and I don't feel good about it, if I'm afraid of the site, then I'll go and add a test. And being able to do that inside of Docker has been a game changer for me. The last thing I want to call out, just to tell you because it's awesome, this laptop that I'm on right here, this Surface laptop, is, pause for effect, an ARM-based laptop. So as I've been whipping around on this machine right here, I've been doing the whole thing on ARM, which is pretty amazing. You can see that it's super fast. I've had 0 issues running around on this. I've been running Docker on ARM, Visual Studio, .NET, this entire application as fast as I possibly can, and have had no problems at all. I've been very, very happy with it, and this whole thing has held up nicely, and the fan hasn't even turned on once, which is pretty cool. So I'm a big fan of ARM right now, and using this as a full-time device for running ARM has been super helpful. If you want to learn more about this kind of stuff, if you go to hanselman.com, I think I wrote a series of blog posts on it called Real World Cloud Migrations, where I talk about moving all of these sites in a lot more detail. So you can go and learn about these in the different blog posts called Real World Cloud Migrations. And then also, I've got a series of blog posts called Penny Pinching in the Cloud, where I try to squeeze as much out of these things and pay as little money as possible. All of Hanselman.com, the blog, the podcast, and Azure cost me less than about $65 a month, which is pretty cool. So we're going to take a break and then come back for 5 o'clock for the AI talk. Thanks so much for hanging out with me.